Cody. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here tonight. I am in Dixon County, and I hope some of our Dixon County folks are out there tonight listening. Um, we are going to talk about soil. My title is From Dirt to Discovery, the basics about soil. So I'm hoping that you will discover some new information that will be helpful to you. First thing that I thought of when it came to this program was all the soil professors say it's not dirt, it's soil. You can't call it dirt. So we're going to figure out why they don't like us calling it dirt, and we need to call it soil. Tonight, we're going to look at the basics of soil, how they're made up. We're going to learn how to collect a soil sample, submit it for testing, and interpret the results. And then we'll look at ways to improve our soil. As Cody said, soil is very important to us. It is the foundation of every garden, obviously. It's also the foundation for most mammals living on land, and we need soil in order to produce our food. So everything walks on the land needs soil. If your soil is poor, your garden will definitely struggle, no matter how much water or fertilizer you add. Want to talk about what's in the soil, what makes up soil. Well, soil is made up of air, water, organic matter, and mineral particles. The mineral particles make up, obviously, the greatest amount of soil, and those mineral particles are sand, salt, and silt. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later. The organic matter provides living matter in the soil. So really, soil is actually alive. If it's good soil, it's got microbes and bacteria and fungi growing in it. So they're important in order to break down our leaves and things that, animals, things like that, that end up on the ground. And that is what actually helps those things decompose. We've talked about that soil is made up of clay, sand, and silt. And this is our soil triangle. It's a little intimidating looking, but it's a really good way to figure out what kind of soil you have. Um, Up here is the clay area. Our silt is over here, and then our sand is over here. So we know that those three basic items. Sand is going to be gritty, of course. Clay is going to feel sticky when it's wet. And we know silt is very smooth in your hands. So if you have some soil, you want to just pick up your soil, a handful of it, and kind of rub it in your hand, and you'll be able to tell a little bit about it. If it's gritty, you've got some sand there. I don't believe we have a whole lot of sand here in our area, unless you're down close to the river. But the soil texture actually does refer to the sizes of the particles in the soil, in the minerals. So we know clay holds water, and we know sand, water drains through immediately. And then silt is actually it holds water, but at the same time, it can also let water go and let it drain. So we need a mixture of those soils in order to make the best combination for growing plants. And actually, anybody that grows would say loam is the best soil. That's what they would really love to have. But in our area, we have silt loam. And silt loam is not necessarily bad. It actually does pretty well. We have very well grown crops in this soil across Tennessee. So silt loam is good. We'll take it. Like I said, loam is actually the gardener's dream. In case you'd like to know how much sand, silt, and clay that you have in your soil, you could actually take a hand or actually go down about 3 inches or so, get a sample of soil there, all three inches, put it in a jar with some water and shake it up and let everything settle out. And that'll give you a good idea of what your soil is made of as far as the minerals go. The sand will sink to the bottom. The silt will be in the middle, and then the clay will be at the top. And floating on the top of the water will be your organic material. So everything else actually settles to the bottom. So that's a really neat way, if you have children even, to do a test like that and see what kind of soil you have. I think that's kind of a fun thing to do myself. So let's see here. We'll look at soil horizons now. The soil horizons are the layers of soil that we have. It's it's the way soil is actually how it develops. The horizons obviously go across. The sea horizon down here at the very bottom is the parent material for soil. So it's usually rocks and things like that that eventually break down, and they go step by step up until they are actually making soil that we can use. Um, the O horizon is where all your organic material is, and that's just the very top of the soil that you can see underneath whatever grass that you might be growing, but it's what we can see at the top of the ground. Horizon A is where most of the plant roots are. It's where our essential minerals and water and air are found. And that's an important area that we want to keep in good shape. We want our soil to be loose and crumbly and be able to hold air and water. So those are very important horizons of the soil. And then down here in B, which is our subsoil, in our area, there's something called a fragipan. And what a fragipan is, it's like almost like a plate going across the ground that you can't permeate. Roots can't get through it. Um, Water sometimes will settle there when it drains through the soil. It can settle there and cause problems for your vegetables if it's too wet. Also for row crop farmers, that becomes a problem because their row crops have problems either with the dryness or the wetness of the soil when that water gets to the fragipan and just sits there. Um, it's a lot harder than the soil above or below it, but it's not a rock. It's actually sand and silt cemented together. Something kind of interesting is every state has a soil, has an official soil. And here in Tennessee, it's the Dixon. And I thought that was kind of fun. Just wanted to share that with you all. You can look at this, it's called a soil monolith. And what that is someone is who has perfect, great equipment can actually get a vertical section of the soil. It's got to be carefully cut and removed and preserved just so that we can see the natural layering or horizons in their order. So you can look at this, our Dixon soil, and it's pretty obvious where the horizons break. Up here is our organic, our topsoil, our subsoil, and then here is the fragipan and the sea horizon, which is more the parent material that makes solid soil above it. So I just thought that was a neat little thing to tell you about the state soil. I didn't realize that there were state soils uh, until this when I was researching for this program. So we're lucky we have a neat name, Dixon soil. You know what? There are people from other counties in here on our talk too, and I apologize. But probably the soil in your area is also called the Dixon. Well, we want to talk about soil health because we want our soil to be healthy in order to grow our crops, our vegetables. And this is NRCS's definition of soil health. And the NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It is, I believe everybody has an office in their counties. and they have a lot of information about soils, and they could help you with soil mapping if you need that. Soil type, they're very good for helping with all of those things, along with other programs that they offer to farmers. But this definition that you see here is basically saying that soil is living and that it does sustain plants, animals, and humans. Soil is alive. It is in that organic matter that we see our earthworms, bacteria, fungi, plant roots, and more. We want to keep it that way by putting more compost and things like that back into the soil to build it. And building it up will increase the health and increase our ability to grow vegetables and other things that are very nutritious for us. Organic matter is at the heart of stewardship of soil and soil health. So now that we've talked about those things, what's in our soil, let's look at soil sampling. And I understand maybe somebody may already have done this and you know all about it. And then I also understand that there are a few people here that probably haven't ever done this before. So in order to do a soil sample, you'll need to use clean sampling tools. And what I mean by that is you'll need clean gloves, clean buckets, clean shovel, clean probe, whatever kind of utensils that you use, just be sure that they're very clean. If they're not, maybe if you use that bucket to wash your car and there's residue left in it, well, that will affect the outcome of your soil test. Same thing with fertilize. People, put fertilize in buckets and then empty it out and don't ever clean the bucket out. And so that will also affect your soil test. One thing to remember too is to sample at a consistent depth. For gardens, we need the soil from 0 to 6 inches to be sampled. And for fruit trees and grapes, there's recommended to take soil samples at 2 different depths. You take one sample from 0 to 8 inches and one sample from 8 to 16 inches. And that's because the roots of fruit trees and grapes and other fruit crops actually go deeper into the soil than our typical vegetable plants. When we do get our soil samples, we want to be sure to collect at least 10 subsamples from the area that you're looking at planting in a zigzag pattern, and thoroughly mix those cores. So you will pull several samples, at least 10, and you can pull more. Take those samples, and I'll talk about how to take those samples here in a minute, and put them in the clean bucket and mix them with something clean to thoroughly incorporate all those samples into one large sample. And then you will take a cup of that soil to fill one of our UT soil test boxes, or bring at least a cup of that soil sample to the office, and we will help you get it packaged up. But as you can see here, we have soil probes that are at the office. At my office, you're able to check those out and use those to get your soil sample. So this is showing you a little bit more up close. This is the soil sample that soil probe that has the step side on it here, and which is really handy. This young lady over here is using that to get a soil sample. It's a whole lot easier on your back, and it's a little harder on your pocket if you decide to purchase one of those, though. This one is a handheld. We have to push that into the ground ourselves. If the ground is too hard, don't push it, don't use a mallet and try to get the soil sample, because you'll just be compacting your soil and you might not get a good soil test result out of that. Here is my big T. You can tell this is taken at a time when we weren't so dry, but this is my little T for UT Vols today. Big game coming up this weekend. I understand it's game day in Knoxville this weekend, so it'll be crazy. Um, but anyways, this is showing you a soil sample in the bottom of the probe. You need to go 6 inches deep, as I said, and you want to be sure that you do 6 inches over the entire area that you're interested in planting in. If you need to use a trowel, just be sure and go in at an angle, and it's recommended that you get at least a 1 inch wide strip and a half an inch thick. And you can also use a shovel and just kind of divide that soil out. Of course, this looks very easy and perfect on the screen, but it is not that easy to use these methods. So just do it when you have some time and patience if you don't use a soil probe. Now, as I said, we would take those samples in a random pattern. Here's an example over here of a zigzag pattern. You don't have to do it like that. You can actually, take a soil sample here and then walk around and get one here and just kind of, weave your way through and back and 10 samples, 10 subsamples is great, but if you want to take more than 10, that's perfect too. Just the more you take, the better reading you'll get for that particular property there that you're looking at. However, if you do have areas in your land that are lower lying, maybe where water settles, or you can tell that whatever's growing there is much different than what is growing in the rest of the area, don't necessarily soil sample in that area for your composite soil. If it's an area that's really large, you may want to do a separate soil sample on that area. But hopefully, if you're going to be growing a garden, you will choose an area that's pretty flat and you can do a soil sample just randomly and just take one sample. And here's a visual of our soil box, and it's very small. You can see here, this is a pin. Once you fold it up, it's not even as tall as a pin, but it does hold at least a cup of soil. So be sure and have a cup of soil to bring to the office if you're going to do it at the office. Our tests are $15 for a basic test, which is going to give you pH and nutrients. Organic matter, you can test for that separately, and that's an additional 15. And if you want to find out what the actual texture of your soil is, and the texture is, once again, salt, I keep saying salt, silt, clay, and what am I missing? Silt, clay, oh, let's see. Silt, clay. I'm sorry, y'all. Silt, clay, and sand. There we go. Silt, clay, and sand. I don't know how that fell right out of my brain. Um, all righty. So once you have your soil sampled and it's boxed, thank you, Cody. I can't see the chat box from where I'm at, but I saw you pop up there. Here's the soil sample submission form. I don't expect you to be able to read that. It's just an example of what you will fill out when you come to the office. Of course, your basic information at the top. What's really nice about this is you can bring one soil sample to the office, and then you can actually have that soil tested for 4 different planting options. So if this area is similar to, or you think you might want to put maybe shrubs there or fruit trees versus just a regular vegetable garden, you can choose different codes. Down here, you can see, like if you wanted to do a lawn test, you put an L in this spot here. There are spots or options for all the fruit trees and the grapes and blackberries and strawberries, even figs. So these are all our codes. And like I said, they go across here. One sample, you can do 4 different tests, tests for different vegetables. And let's see, we always want to see a soil test before we make any recommendations. Yes, that's exactly right, Cody. We do want to see that. But like I said, here we are. We will send this in with your soil sample, and then you will get a report back. Now, we can send these samples for you, or you can send them yourself. It's a matter of preference. At our office, we're glad to mail them for you. We do add an additional $5 for shipping on those. And it takes 7 to 10 days to get your report back. And just remember that the mail these days is not like it used to be. We used to send things priority mail, and they would get to the lab within 2 days. Well, now just regular mail, they say it's going to take 2 days. So I mean, it usually takes longer than that, but paying priority doesn't always make sense anymore than it used to. It used to be you could send it and it would get there the next day. It's also important to remember that the lab is closed on the weekend. So if you choose to mail these items yourself, be sure and get them in early in the week so that they do have time to be delivered by Friday, and they will take them in the office so they don't sit outside the door until Monday. But here is a soil test report. And now we're going to go through each section. So don't worry, I know you can't read this. It's very, very tiny, but I just wanted you to see what it looked like as a composite. At the top, there's usually a nice little UT logo and our lab's address. But when you get your soil test back, you're going to find the pH level on the reading, which will mean if you need to add lime or not. Lime controls your pH level. And then the nutrient levels for phosphorus and potassium will be there. Phosphorus is important in root development and flowering, and potassium is disease resistance and plant vigor. So it encourages those things. Nitrogen is not actually measured for this soil test, and that's because it's very transient. It changes levels during from time to time. It's based on if it rains, nitrogen levels can change. So we just want to be sure that we don't give you something that isn't consistent. And however, they will give you a recommendation of nitrogen to add based on what your crop is that you want to grow. So reading a soil test, as I said, the pH is right here. You're going to see a soil pH and a buffer value. The soil pH is the one that we really base our lime recommendations on. And then in this example, the pH is low for growing fruits and vegetables. For most fruits and vegetables, all vegetables are pretty much, they need a pH between 6 and 7. And if it's not at least 6.1, they are going to recommend lime to you. This buffer pH is something that it's a little confusing, difficult to explain, but it is the resistance of the soil to change pH when you add lime. So that's a little bit of chemistry that I'm not greatly familiar with, but if you'd like to learn more about it, I'll be glad to help you, and we'll get that information together and talk about it. So when we talk about soil pH, there is a reason we want the soil pH to be between 6 and 7, and that's because all your nutrients, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your major three, they are all mostly available to the soil, to plants in this area between 6 and 7. And pH is actually a measure of acidity. So the lower we go in our number, the more acidic we get, and the higher we go, the more alkaline. So like I said, the sweet spot for most plants is right here in 6 to 7. Also, the secondary and the micronutrients are also mostly available in these areas. We'll look now at the other values that we have. When you get a soil test report back, you'll receive your levels of phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, magnesium, manganese, boron, and sodium. And when you see each of these levels, they will have a letter beside them. And what those letters mean is, take for instance, phosphorus, you have an L beside them too. Well, what that means is it's low. That amount in your soil is low, so that if you add the recommended amount of phosphorus, you will see a change in your yield. Your yield should increase. In potassium, it's a medium level, and that means that it more than likely will. It doesn't say that it will, but it more than likely will increase your yield. In the S means sufficient. So these items, each of these are all sufficiently available in the soil, and there needs to be none added. It's very rare that we see anything like this that needs to be added in these items. Sometimes specialty crops, I know tobacco can sometimes need boron added, but overall, these items down here actually don't usually ever need to be added to your soil. So we'll get to the recommendation portion of the soil test. And this is really nice. Here it is, the nitrogen. It says, see the text below. That is actually where I was telling you about. They will give you recommendations for your nitrogen to be added during your planting time or during the time of the plant growing, during the growing season. But they give you recommendations at the bottom, and I'll show you those in a minute. And this recommends 1.5 pounds of phosphate per 1,000 square feet. And potash, which is potassium and phosphorus, these two, will ask you to, recommends that you add 0.75 pounds per 1,000 square feet of your garden area. I know that's like, well, it's kind of confusing sometimes to figure all that out. How big is your garden area? And how do you work out all this mathematics? But it just takes a little bit of work as far as dividing and multiplying, and you'll be able to come up with the right amount that you will need. And we're at the office. We're always glad to help you figure those numbers out. Um, the pH level, I said, was a little bit low. And so they are recommending that 100 pounds of lime be added per 100 square feet. And remember, the liming is more important than anything in the soil test. Getting your pH correct will provide the best opportunity for your plants to thrive. So be sure and look at that before you look at anything else. If you don't get your pH correct, then your plants cannot absorb the other nutrients that they need. And that's what this chart was all about. So we want to be sure, get that lime correct, and then our plants will be able to thrive. So now we're going to look at reading the soil test report, also about applying the recommendations that they give you. At the bottom of the report, you'll see some narrative like this, and it talks about your nitrogen. And it recommends to add some maybe before you plant your crops, or before or at planting, you can do that. This also talks about your phosphorus recommendations. The phosphorus in in that particular report was low, so they mentioned, as we said earlier, 1.5 pounds to be added as 15 pounds of bone meal, which would be a more organic addition to your soil, or an 8 to 12% potash fertilizer, or 3 pounds of triple super phosphorus. So these are all some things that probably need to learn a little bit more about those if you need to add those items. It's you'll see on a bag a lot of times on fertilizer bags, it'll give you three numbers with a dash in between each number. And those represent NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And that's where all this stuff comes in, where that you will want to see, well, how much phosphorus do I need and how much potassium do I need? And which bag of fertilizer will best suit my needs. Once again, here we talk about mid-season nitrogen being added, and they give you the rates for each type of crop that you're looking at. It talks about tomatoes. Here it's got your vine crops, sweet corn. So you know for every single one of your crops that you might want to grow, you're going to have some recommendations for nitrogen. Once we get our soil tests back and we get our soil all ready to grow, we have, I'm sorry, somebody just walked by and interrupted me. We want to improve our soil by adding some amendments. We are going to look at adding compost and mulch and also cover crops. So when we use compost, it's a good idea to take 1 to 2 inches of compost and spread it across your entire garden and work that into the garden, into the ground. You can use compost or you can use manures. We want to be sure that they're aged and they're ready to be put on. Cody mentioned before, we want to be sure that we don't use any manures where the animals have had particular chemicals that will pass through their system and affect your crops if they are added to the soil there. I've seen that happen many times, and you'll have, it's real obvious when you have chemical damage, your plants will really look funny. And if you ever have that problem, let us know. We'll take a look at it for you and we'll work through that. But that can come through manure. It can come through maybe some hay that you might use as a mulch. So just be leery of that and make sure you know where you're getting your compost and your manures from. So as I mentioned, we'd want to take this 1 to 2 inches of compost and work it into the soil. You can kind of barely work with the top of the soil if you've already, let me say this again. If your soil area, if the area where you want to plant your garden is brand new, it's a good idea to work that soil up a little bit. You might have a tiller, be able to work the top 6 inches of soil, put 1 to 2 inches of compost across that entire area and work it into the ground. That's going to break up any compaction and make the ground easier to absorb water and air and just be a better environment for your plants. Also, the compost will provide the microbes in the other little tiny bugs that help to break down things in the soil that make it richer. Let's see. Adding compost also increases water holding capacity. So another way to improve your soil is to mulch. You can use straw, shredded leaves, dry grass clippings free of weeds, which, I put a smiley face there because how many of us actually have grass clippings that don't have weeds in them? Most of us live in areas where our home maybe have been built on a pasture. And if it's built on a pasture, then you're going to have a lot of weeds and it's going to be really hard to get rid of them out of your yard. So more than likely, we're going to have weeds in our grass clippings. But that's just a thought for somebody that might have a very well manicured lawn. Mulch will protect your soil from erosion, and it helps the ground conserve moisture. It helps the temperature to be moderated in the summer. if you have a light colored mulch on your garden, that will reflect the sun and help the ground from being so hot and evaporating your water. And in the spring, darker mulch will actually help your soil to warm up quicker. Once again, we talked about weeds. If you use the right kind of mulch, you will be able to suppress your weeds. And as this mulch breaks down, it will be adding more organic material to the soil, which is something we always want to do. We want to do that regularly, as every year if we can. Cover crops are actually a very good amendment to the soil, but they're also very important to use even if you don't incorporate them into your soil. And that's because it will reduce erosion in your yard or in your garden when the land is fallow. And what I mean by fallow is that you're not growing anything in the area. So you don't want to just leave it bare so that when it rains, the soil runs off. If you have any kind of an incline at all in your field, you will lose soil. So it will reduce erosion by being there with the roots holding holding the soil in place. It can help to break pest cycles if you're having trouble with a certain insect. Um, you can actually plant these crops and they will hopefully not like that particular crop and will move away from the garden area. And you can kind of match up those insects to the cover crop that you want to use to help you break that cycle. You can also attract beneficial insects using cover crops. The cover crops, once again, they'll be thick in there. The sun won't be able to reach the ground, and so it reduces your weeds. They improve water infiltration, and once again, it will add organic matter if you actually cut it down and let it dry on the ground and work it into the ground, or just actually let it dry and plant into it like it's going to be your mulch. These are some examples of cover crops. We have the crimson clover was in the previous slide that I showed you. This is crimson clover and this is hairy vetch. You can see a nice little bee there because we want to be friendly to our pollinators. So these are really nice things to bring pollinators in. Buckwheat. Buckwheat is really a neat little crop. It's very pretty. And it's a summer crop though, so that if you want to use it as a cover crop, you would use it between the time your cool season crops are finished yielding and prior to when you're going to plant your fall cool season crops. So if you don't plan on planting anything in that area between those two times, buckwheat is a great thing to put in there to fill that and to keep it from eroding and to add um, organic material back to the ground. And here is another option of a mixture of different cover crops and they're actually in a raised bed. So you can use cover crops in a raised bed too. It's a really good idea to do that in between seasons to help keep that soil intact and to build up nutrients. So we talked about raised bed just a minute ago. So when we grow in a raised bed, we know they're really popular because if you have soil that is poor and you don't want to have to dig into it because most of our soil is actually clay. We talk about silt loam. The silt loam that I mentioned earlier, that's an ideal situation. Most of us are not in ideal situations. We have many areas where the soil has been scraped off all the way down to the clay, and we have no organic matter whatsoever left there. And when that happens, it's really difficult to get your soil back in shape. You can do it. It's going to take you some time and money, but you can do it by adding the compost and actually disturbing the soil by tilling in the compost and adding the nutrients that you need, such as the nitrogen and or actually the phosphorus and the potassium. Um, so in other words, based on the fact that we have bad soil in most of our areas, we can use raised beds. And the growing media in raised beds is the key to your success. You want to be sure that they're um, they're sterile, and you want to be sure that they're well screened, especially if you end up using some soil, some topsoil. Be sure and screen that, make sure it doesn't have rocks and grass and things like that in it. But advantages of growing in a raised bed um, is that we have an improved soil quality, which we really, it's not soil, it's the growing media. You have a little bit better control over the nutrients that are in that. You add them yourself as you go, and you know exactly what you've added. Uh, they drain better, but that can also be a problem because they may drain and take out some of your nutrients that you've added to the soil. It will leach them out. So you want to be careful about overwatering. There's better aeration for the soil in a raised bed for the roots to receive, to be able to get air to them. And the soil warms up faster in a raised bed. And obviously, as I said before, you can add your fertility to optimize the situation. Disadvantages, like we talked about, it drying out faster. So you have to water it more often, but be careful not to overwater it once, or else you'll leach out those nutrients that you want to keep in balance. This is a nice raised bed over here. It's actually on legs and it's not very deep. So this may be something, this person just has a nice little flower garden in it, but you can actually um, build raised beds on legs like this to save your back and make them a little bit deeper. And they would be really nice to have. So when we grow in our raised beds, we want to fill them with high quality topsoil if available. Now that's if available. And like I mentioned earlier, if you use the topsoil and it's not actually packaged topsoil, you'll want to make sure and screen that, use a screen to shake, put soil on top of the screen and shake it and let everything go through that soil, and any rocks and grass that you have will stay on top and you can get rid of those. But hopefully they will have done that for you before you purchase it. You can use mixed media, which means using garden soil or topsoil with compost and vermiculite or perlite. And if you want to mix your own media for your raised bed, you'll put in equal amounts of, and this isn't by weight, this is by volume. So if you add a gallon bucket of garden soil, you'll want to add a gallon bucket of compost and a gallon bucket of vermiculite. And then you will mix these obviously very well together and put them in your raised bed. You can also use the soilless mixes, which include peat moss, compost, vermiculite, perlite. A common mix of that is actually similar. You do equal volumes instead of weight. You'll use a gallon bucket of peat moss, a gallon bucket of compost, and once again, a gallon bucket of vermiculite, which the last two, the mixed media and the soilless mixes, they're exactly the same, except for in the mixed media there, you have the garden soil, and in the soilless media, you're using peat moss. I thought this was a kind of a neat little table here. It talks about soil versus soilless media. We can look at the composition of each and what might be an advantage to using one over the other. Interestingly enough, soil actually buffers pH, which means it helps wide swings in nutrient availability to the plants by this buffer pH, by buffering pH. It in soilless media, it there's very minimal buffering that takes place. So when you add a nutrient to your soil, the effects of that nutrient will happen quickly, wide swings in reaction. So you don't necessarily want to take advantage of that and think, oh, if I add a whole lot of nitrogen, then I'm going to be in really good shape because it's going to work fast. You don't want to do that. You want to follow recommendations. One thing about nitrogen that you might want to remember is that too much nitrogen will actually put on a lot of leafy material on your plants. They'll be beautiful, green, very luscious, but your tomatoes may not, you may not have very many tomatoes at all on your plants because all the energy is going to building the actual plant itself and not going toward the fruit itself too. So you want to be careful with the nitrogen. Just add it as it's recommended. Our water and air circulation in soil varies by the texture. We know if it's more clay, it sure isn't going to allow water and air to move around in it very quickly. And it's beyond me how that there can be any air in clay. I know it holds water really well, but to think that there's air in clay is kind of amazing. Soilless media, when it comes to water and air, it's actually engineered to be consistent for drainage and aeration. We can look at our nutrients. They're naturally released in soil based upon our pH. If we have our pH correct, they're released as they need to be for the plant growth to be good. Um, in soilless media, the nutrients are very low. You actually may not even have any nutrients in your soilless media. So you have to actually add those through your fertilizing. Some people enjoy using drip irrigation, and they can actually hook up a little device to add their fertilization during their watering process. And that is something that is a little bit further in depth than what we're going to talk about today, but it's a good idea. It's a good thing to think about. But you can definitely control your nutrients that way, but it's very, very important to watch what you put on there and make sure you put enough or not make sure that you put enough and not too much. Um, we already talked about the composition of soil versus soilless media. And here I have an example of a soilless media um, submission form. And I know that you might be able to read this pretty well, but this just has a place for you to name your sample. If you want to say raised bed 1, raised bed 2, or you use maybe pots to grow things in, pot 1 or pot A or B. Each sample that you submit is $35. Um, it requires more chemistry to be able to analyze the soilless media than it does the actual soil, but it is $35 per or per media sample sent in, and you need at least a half a gallon of this media in a sealed plastic bag. And your analysis will include pH, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, ammonium, and soluble salts. And those three at the bottom there are not tested for in our soil media or in our soil, but they are in the soilless media. So our soilless media analysis comes back like this. And you can see it will tell you what your levels are. Once again, it talks about if something's low or if it's an acceptable rate, um, your ranges for the different nutrients. And then here it will tell you about your fertilizer recommendations, and it talks about per 64 square foot. So that is actually based on an 8 by 8 foot bed. talks about your nitrogen, your phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And so it is important to apply your calcium and magnesium to your raised beds, which you don't normally ever have to do in regular soil. It also addresses lime or pH, and to raise your pH, we know that we use lime, but if your pH is too high, it's recommended to add sulfate or sulfur. And that is somewhat of a tricky thing to do, especially when you're using your regular garden soil. It's that's something that you want to be really careful with. If you want to lower your pH, maybe for blueberries, just be super careful that you only add the amount that they talk about and that you incorporate it well so that you don't end up having a poor crop because of that, because of having too much. I think I have kind of flown through these slides, and there is probably a lot of information that I left out. If anybody has questions, please ask them. I'm Cody, like I said, I think I have left a lot of information out that I had. If anybody needs to talk about anything that we've mentioned, clarify anything, I'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, so we should have plenty of time for some questions here if anyone wants if anyone's got any questions or anything else they kind of want us to talk about just a little bit more, just let us know and we're happy to answer them. You're more than welcome. Yeah, thank you, Vicky. I thought that was a great presentation and it covered a lot of good information.
Well, thank you. I hope it was clear.
Well, when it comes to soils, like we said, I mean that's the foundation for everything, and
Yes,
there's a lot that goes into it, even a lot more than what we mentioned here. So,
yeah, there is. I mean, I got to looking and I have at least a foot high stack of things that I printed off to research for this. And there's classes and classes about soils. So there's a lot to know. This is only the tip of the iceberg.
and like we said, and kind of like I said in this course before, this is going to cover. We're trying to cover the basics so that everyone has a good foundation, so that we can kind of build and get into more advanced topics on things and not get over people's heads. So, there will be more advanced topics that come out on this. It's just going to take us some time to get there and make sure everyone's on the same page in the class.
Mhm.
So, but if no one has any questions, so when it comes to increasing beneficial fungi and bacteria in the soil, really you're looking at just making a really good compost that's going to help start breaking stuff in the soil down. Um, you got anything to add to that, Vicky?
Actually, I missed the question. They're popping up on my screen, but then they're disappearing very quickly. I don't know.
Click on your chat box down at the bottom.
I don't see my chat box. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Increasing beneficial fungi and bacteria in the soil and raised beds. That's a really good question. Compost should have those things in it, and because that's what compost is, right, Cody? I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean, compost, we're basically just using those beneficial fungi and bacteria to help break down um, what we're composting quicker, so that they will have an increased load of those fungi and bacteria in them.
mhm.
So, I mean, just getting you a good compost pile started and start really incorporating that into your raised beds. Of course, we don't want that to be too much of our soil in our raised beds, but you can uh, add quite a bit without messing up too much.
Okay, suggestions for increasing beneficial fun. Oh, we already read that one. Um, The best way to build topsoil. Well, the best way to do that is actually, as I mentioned, to add 1 to 3 inches of compost to the top of your soil that you have and incorporate that into the soil. And and do that regularly each year. And you will eventually build up a good amount of topsoil. You can't make it, it has to be, it's years and years of rocks and things breaking down from parent material that have to make it their way up to the top that to create topsoil. So naturally, so the only way we can really do that is to work up the soil that we have and add compost to that.
And
How
also
about you,
depend.
Cody?
It also depends on the size area. I mean, there's a lot of yards and stuff around here in Clarksville and the surrounding areas that when developers come in, they just come in, remove all the topsoil, get it
Mhm.
down to a level, and you're basically left with a hard pan of clay as your front yard. So if you're talking about just in a garden spot, that works. What Vicky mentioned, yeah, it just takes years of making sure you have the right soil amendments and building your soil up. Now, if you're talking about the a yard as a whole, that's going to be hard to do. The best thing that you can really, really do is just, buy good screen topsoil from a trusted source. Um, I know there's a couple places in Clarksville that have some okay topsoil, but really I'd be looking towards Nashville to try to cover a yard sized area with that. Um, as
I've talked
for,
to some folks about that too, and there are some places in the Nashville area. Actually, Becky Grubbs Bowling is our lawn specialist, and she has good recommendations for locations to get topsoil. But you have to be really careful when you buy it, right, Cody?
yeah, I mean, you definitely want to buy a good screen topsoil. If you don't buy it screened, you're going to get some stuff that you might as well just turned your yard over and worked it in. So,
Mhm.
um, but like I said, that's all depending on the size area you're talking about.
Right.
If you are talking about just a garden size area, you can use the compost and organic material to start help breaking down some of that um, other soil a little bit quicker and start building a better soil within your garden.
Something else too that I've thought of is actually economically, if somebody can't do a large area all at once, just start with a small area of your garden or your yard and try to incorporate um, compost and stuff into that to improve your soil. You don't have to do everything at once. We can take it step by step. Each year, add a little more to the area that you're working with because it does get expensive. This stuff is expensive.
Absolutely, it does. It gets expensive quickly. So,
Mhm.
any more
Anybody else?
questions? All right. Well, thank y'all so much for joining us tonight. If y'all do have any more questions, feel free to email me or Vicky. Um, and like I said, I will be sending like I always do, I'll be sending the link to the video out tomorrow, so y'all can always go back and reference it for when y'all need it. Well, thank y'all
Thank
all
you.
for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a good evening. Hope you get some rain.